All right, my friends, I am so excited for this conversation with this human being. My dear friend, Rabbi Nicole Guzik, is a life changer, a sweet human being. She serves Sinai Temple in Los Angeles, and I have long admired her leadership, starting from when she was a rabbinical student, and we partnered on some grassroots work to re-enliven the Jewish world. And look where we are now.
Let's say, how'd we do?
Well, I'll say this: we have a conversation to have, and I think that we're each. I certainly admire the work that you're doing. I think that we're each advancing that original mission with the same heart, and I'm really proud to share this conversation with you. Ostensibly, we are talking about this book of mine, A Rabbi's Heart, which is a collection of writings that I put out between 2006 and 2017. But I do believe this conversation will be a broader one than that, and will address the kind of work that we do in this moment and beyond. So it is my delight to look at you, my friend, to say welcome.
Oh, thank you. It's such an honor to be here, to have this wonderful moment with you, Rabbi Creditor. And also, I mean, as you said, to discuss your beautiful, beautiful book, A Rabbi's Heart. I know we'll get into more of it soon, but for anyone who's watching right now, an immediate Amazon quick purchase, one of the best purchases of your summer. And I'll continue to promote during, because it really, really was an uplifting read in so many ways. So I'll get more into it.
I appreciate that. That's a really nice recommendation. Wow. How much do I owe you?
I'll just add to that, you know, many rabbis right around this time, and I'm sure the rabbis have said this to you, they ask for recommendations for their sermon writing for High Holy Days. And as I was reading through, I thought to myself, I thought a few things. One, certainly this is going to be on the top 10 list for rabbis for this upcoming High Holy Days, which is interesting because the writings end in 2017, which show the timelessness of this compilation. There's that, but also you can spend hours on one of your essays and just pour into each of the words, which also shows it's not just a rabbi's rabbi book, but for any layperson who's looking to be inspired. So we'll get more into the themes, but it was really enjoyable.
I appreciate that a lot. You know, one of the reasons that I'm excited to have this specific conversation with you is because I've also watched during these times, you continue to share publicly some reflections that are both timely and timeless. And I actually wanted to ask you a question about that, if you don't mind, just to get us started. What does it feel like during these really vulnerable moments for all of us? I mean, literally, there is not a person who feels 100% fine right now. To put your own heart out there in the way that you do, what has it felt like to be a writer and to get responses both from local community and beyond? What's been your experience?
Thank you for asking that. Such a nice question. What I have found as a writer during these times is if you're willing to be vulnerable, that's when you receive the biggest response. When you're willing to, you know, show the brokenness of your own heart, it gives permission to others to feel, to be personal on Facebook, which tends to be something that people can hide behind. You know, people will hide behind their posts or hide behind their likes or hide behind, you know, their sharing of someone else's message. But when you actually provide, you know this as well as I do, there's always an interesting balance as a rabbi. How much do you share personally? You know, how much, and you'll have to tell me as a father of older children, how much you can get away with. I tend to share a lot. I share a lot of stories of my kids. They're young, 9, 7, and 5. So we'll see how much more I can share. But when I reveal just what's going on in our own family or what's happening on the streets of Los Angeles, there's a way to break out of the loneliness that I think all of us have felt so poignantly this year. I want to break out of my own loneliness. I mean, that's really it. For anyone who asks me about Abyssal Torah, I just say, you know exactly what I'm thinking that week. It's my own therapy. You know, it's exactly what I'm thinking this week. And so I just appreciate people letting me write. And I always appreciate when someone's willing to read it.
Will you relate in that way? Exactly how you said that. I really appreciate your candor, because I think that's the kind of writing that, or sharing, or teaching, or just being, that I think rabbis are called to. That's not fair, because it might be a personality-driven thing. Some of us really wield our rabbinic voice differently. Introverts, extroverts, social justice,
It's interesting.
shuls.
Yeah.
But there's something about being willing to be vulnerable and to actually have the cathartic experience of putting your own heart out there,
Yeah, that's
which
what
for
it is.
some is totally reassuring, and for some is very unnerving. They want their rabbi to be some symbolic, perfect thing. And you know, I had the experience back when I was a pulpit rabbi, when I went through something very personal and not easy, very public, because inevitably what happens in our lives is very public, and being a rabbi parent is something that we work on. Someone said to me, after something painful happened, now you'll be able to understand me.
Oh, oof.
And part of me was like, this is an education I didn't want, and I didn't do
That's
it for
right.
you.
Right. Wow.
You know, so it's hard.
I'm experiencing that in a different way right now. And you tell me whenever. I'm enjoying this too, but I have lots of questions to ask you. But I am experiencing that in it's interesting here at Sinai. Certainly people may say, you know, is it harder to relate to you, Rabbi Guzik, because you're younger or you haven't yet gone through X, Y, or Z? I haven't experienced that so much in the rabbinate, but where I do experience it, you know, I'm in marriage and family therapy intern right now. And all the time, clients will ask the question, I'd like to have a therapist who's my age, or I'd like to have a therapist who's the same religion or ethnicity that I am. And it's a similar, like it's a similar theme. You know, do you have to look or be developmentally, you know, the on the same plane as someone else in order to understand them?
It's a really interesting thing. I mean, you and I aren't exactly the same age, I think, but I'll say this about my experience being my age as I get a little bit older. I find myself able to relate more gently with people the longer I live.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, you know, I was 26 when I was first ordained, and I remember someone my grandparents' age coming and asking me a real life, really big question, and saying to myself, and actually I said it out loud to them, like, why are you talking to me? Like, you know, I've read some Talmud, but really you're the one who knows things. And I was shocked that they were open to that, to me having some kind of, and then there have also been times where I thought I had something to offer and probably overstated things. And only now is it becoming clear that, oh my gosh. So the person who said to me, now you can relate to me, that might not have been kind to me, but it might have been honest about what they needed.
Right.
It's really interesting. It's very interesting. And you know, as a pivot toward the book a little bit, I was looking for a title, like what was I going to call this thing? And when I settled on A Rabbi's Heart, which is actually part of the title of one of the essays within, I realized again what I needed. You know, so I physically have done this quite a number of times. I just do this.
Wow.
And it's comforting in some very deep and mysterious way that the me that I was when I was writing these was often in pain. Was often in pain, as we all are intermittently in life. But these were very, very big years for me. And so I published my heart.
Mm.
You know, like this is an interesting balancing act that we do as public figures, as rabbis, as teachers, as writers. So I appreciate being able to share this kind of a conversation with a colleague and friend who does similar beautiful, vulnerable things.
Thank you. So when you say that, this is not on the script that I wrote for myself, by the way, the questions that I planned. But when you say that, you know, you wrote these essays somewhat in pain, is this also your process of healing? Do you feel somewhat healed after writing this, or through, maybe not after, but through?
Yeah, it's let's see how much I reveal in this answer.
Okay, sorry. I know.
No. Look, we make decisions about how much to share, and sometimes we look back, as I have at some of these essays, and I said, "Oh my God, I can't believe I shared that."
Mm.
But it takes a kind of discerning heart and eye to read that and to know what's happening in the back. So, do I consider this healing? Remember that I published this book now, but the book ended in 2017. And I don't know that I was really conscious in those moments, aware of the healing that I needed.
Mm.
They were each of these pieces was its own moment, but a lot of them were explicit responses to very weighty things.
Mm-hmm.
And so I might not have named it as healing, but it was an organic expression of what was happening inside of me.
It's so fascinating, because I was just reading about you know, the ruptures that that occur during traumatic experiences, and it's exactly the way you describe it. There's some kind of emotional response, which is probably your writing. And so even though I said, was there healing during the writing process, now I'm changing my mind. Maybe there's healing through the publication process. You know, your decision to make it open for everyone. So maybe we can transition there, because I do think there's a particular lens that you carry when you walk through the world, Rabbi Creditor. And I do. I mean, the fact that even to speak about the idea that you write as a reaction to personal, to communal, to world events. I'm wondering if you could, and also, by the way, in the introduction, I love that you shared that even though this is a rabbi's heart selected writings, you frame it as some of your prayers, that you offer this as your own prayers. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about that, the lens in which you walk this world. There's even pieces in which you speak about the eyes and the way that you see. And so speak to us about the lens that you offer as a rabbi, and a little bit more about what led to bringing this to the world.
Thanks. Let me speak more broadly than personally, because I actually think that this moment in my career and this moment in my life, and with this specific slice of a rabbinic calling that this inward time is really cultivating in me, I think that a rabbi's eyes are really attuned to where individuals and communities and the world we inhabit are. I don't think that's unique to Judaism. I think a religious leader, a spiritual leader, who serves a community or serves large, more generally, we are able to see patterns happening in life that is both based on our study of history and of one people's path forward through time, right? So we can talk about the journey of the matriarchs and the patriarchs into the process of the prophets, into the shifting worldviews of the writings. And then we go from the biblical canon into what we would now consider more modern history, right? The rabbinic era, and then commentaries. And then the rebellions that we have as a people, even post those two canons, that makes me really aware that change is disruptive and hard, and always comes with loss, even when it's constructive change. Amos Oz famously said that every champion of change is a traitor in the eyes of someone who can't.
Ooh.
And change, in the training that you're doing right now with marital and other kinds of counselings, right? Change is really hard even when you ask for it.
Mm.
And so my process as a writer is often I see something or read something that is so provocative. I remember writing the Theology of the Runaway Bunny.
Yeah.
Right? And so
I loved it.
I'm so glad you did. Like I'm reading as an Abba. I'm also reading as someone who, like, I used to collect children's literature. All my friends thought I was nuts in college. And I was like, I love children's literature, especially those books that really pierce through to reality better than the grown-up books know how to.
So much so, yeah.
And so I read that and I just start crying. That's often what happens. Like I'll see a good movie or a show. I remember I have some pieces about Dexter that actually didn't make me cry. It made me cringe.
Yeah.
And I just want to pour it out. And I would say that my lens is wrapped up in that famous teaching in, it starts in Mishle, right? The chapter that ends up being used as Eshet Chayil with some people's practice, right? The phrase is Piha potcha b'chochma v'torah chesed al lashona, which roughly translates as her mouth is opened with chokhmah, with wisdom, and the Torah of chesed, the Torah of love, is on her tongue. So the rabbis immediately ask, wait, there's a Torah of love? Does that mean there is a Torah that's not about love? And so they answer with a Torah that you learn in order to share is a Torah of love. A Torah that you learn without the intention of sharing it, that's not a Torah of love. And so I think that my writing, at least in reflection, is an attempt to do that, is my way of saying there's so much love to share, even if that love is the emotionality of being in a world in a painful moment. I find this to be, when I read this over and over, and I have reviewed a lot of these essays for the publication, and since, I just feel the emotions I was feeling then. And they were so big that they had to come out somehow. And this is how they took form.
They're just beautiful. And I want to jump into some of those pieces. It's, do I want to talk about Runaway Bunny yet? But, but one of the pieces that struck me was how common it is for, certainly in our own family and for many parents to recite the Shema at bedtime with our children. And I love how you put it, that there's kind of this magical moment of bedtime. And when you speak about this idea, the Torah of love and sharing those moments with our children, and yet what really struck me is that the magic for some reason ends. I loved how you said, what would it look like to, in the same vein, the same way we look at our children in their eyes and recite the Shema so that they know they're protected and secure and loved. Why, as you put, why don't we say that same line or that same kind of magical Torah to our beloved or to our parents, to our friends or our siblings? And so I'm wondering if you could speak for a moment, why are the rituals and the traditions that we treasure, why do we limit them to childhood, which we do so much? I'm doing kind of a deep dive into the rituals that we offer here in our congregation. And I realized how lucky our preschoolers are, how lucky our day schoolers are and religious school students, because at a certain point, the magic, I don't know if it filters out, but we just kind of stop. So I want to know if you'll speak about that a little bit. It really turned a piece of my heart when you wrote about it.
Thank you. Well, let me challenge you and me as individuals, and anyone who we're lucky enough to be sharing this with, though we can't see you. We love you so much. Thank you for being here. It's like you break the fourth wall sometimes. It shouldn't.
It shouldn't.
It shouldn't. And you and I, look, I'm grateful for this weird gift of Zoom, because I'm really like, I'm with my friend and I'm looking into her eyes and she's looking into mine and we're really looking at each other. And this is magic. This is ritual. This is real. And maybe, right, I'm challenging us tonight, right? You with your beloved, me with mine. It doesn't have to be the Shema.
No, it doesn't. Right.
It doesn't have to be the Shema. It can be anything, but to suspend the skepticism that gets in the way, this like terrible adult disease of disbelief, and step back into the magic. I mean, as I'm saying this, my eyes are welling up. This is what we're supposed to be in the world. We're always children. We're just older children. And who in this fragile world doesn't need reassurance that you're safe and protected, that you're loved? And, we daven this language, but we don't always feel it when we're davening it. When you pray, when I don't mean you, but when a person prays, right? Ahava rabav tanu, God, you love us so much. That's what we're saying. And I'm not really into davening in English, though I've done it sometimes just to feel it. My native language is English, even though my heart's language is beyond words. But Avara Bav Tanu really means, God, you loved us so much. And isn't that what we need? Like as children, the biggest gift is to be held and for the world to be made more secure. And that's why we have to show up as parents. No matter how busy we are, put the phone down and help our children without them feeling threatened. Help them also put their phones down, because especially in this really weird time that we're in, our world can't become digital. Connections can be real when they're digital, but those magic moments, the ritual of just being present, I think when we live a little bit longer, we are both less open to the magic and more in need of it.
Yes, we are. We're less open and more in need of it. I'm sure you get this question all the time. I have couples who come for premarital counseling, kind of like a standard 2 to 3 sessions, which I always appreciate that they make the time to do that. And in one of the sessions, they're surprised when the homework that I give them is to create a ritual for themselves.
Right.
And the pushback, which I think a lot of rabbis hear, is, well, yeah, we'll do that. We'll do that when we have kids. We'll do that when we start a family. And I try to explain in those sessions that they're family.
Right.
I think part of our job as rabbis and in this community is to redefine what family means. A family can also be a person of one who connects themselves to a greater community. That's a family.
Well, the tradition, you probably know this already. I'm sure you've learned this just as I have, but I remember learning it recently and being shocked by it, right? If you are with a group of people, with adults and children for Seder, right, on Passover, the youngest child traditionally says, Mani Shana, asks the question.
Right.
If you are 2 partners, you ask each other the question. And the Mishnah says, if you're alone, you ask yourself the questions. And I think that's the point, exactly what you said. The word family sometimes, I'm thinking about shows I've seen recently with my kids. We're watching Anne with an E, which is a dramatic retelling of Anne of Green Gables, and a lot of becoming family is part of this. Family. I'm also thinking of scenes in The Good Place, which is one of my favorite shows.
Oh, I thought you were going to say This Is Us. I was waiting for you to say that next.
Oh, no, this is right. That's, I want to be crying the entire time.
I know. I was like, that'll take us an hour and a half, but it's.
but
yeah, family, The Good Place. Watch The Good Place, yeah.
Yeah, oh yeah. I'm a huge Good Place fan.
Huge fan, agreed.
Huge fan. I think that family equals safety feeling. It equals this. It's supposed to be anyway.
It's supposed to be, which leads to another piece of your writing in a second, but keep going.
Well, but because of the instability of the world, it's hard as an adult to believe there's anything I can count on. And the world doesn't lend itself to gentleness. I think, if we're brave enough to look at the sky and look at a flower and allow our hearts to be touched, we can experience some of the gentleness. If we'll remember as we leave the era of Zoom, whatever the next stage is, if we remember to really look each other in the eyes and wait for someone else to be present and to think and to know the difference between when you have your camera on and off has been your presence for me.
Wow. Mm-hmm.
I think that I think the magic can come back. It takes a lot of bravery, but I think it can come back.
Agreed. But it also means that we as leaders have to be brave enough to open up the conversation. So there's that. But to transition to that idea of safe Jewish homes, I was, just moved. So for those of you that, there's no decision, you just need to go on Amazon now and take a few minutes to purchase the book, because what Rabbi Creditor does is, you really choose pretty significant issues to cover, but in particular during the high holy days. And I noticed I don't remember which year, but on one Yom Kippur, you decided to speak about what it means to live in a safe Jewish home, and how not every Jewish home, not every home has the blessing of being safe. And you speak about domestic abuse that occurs within our own society, boldly within our own community. This speaks to my heart. As I mentioned, we're launching a mental health center at Sinai. A few people have said to me, not angrily, just confused, why do we need a mental health center? Is something wrong? What's wrong in our community? And, I, in particular, wanted to start the mental health center to improve mental health, not just to address the crises that certainly exist, but the crises that exist, especially during this year, when we all know DV cases and intimate partner violence increased as people were quarantined at home and didn't have the same kinds of resources or capabilities to live outside their home or get any other kind of residence or shelter. So I do want to ask you, what compelled you to bring up this particular issue on all days of Yom Kippur? I'd love to hear your thought process. Why then? Why was that the issue? And then if you want to speak a little bit more about clearly it's important to you when you think about what a safe Jewish home means. A lot.
You ask really good questions.
A lot.
Yeah.
I think we're just aligned on these themes.
I'm honored by that. I really am. And I'm in such deep appreciation of your leadership in these vulnerable spaces for our community. One of the statistics that startled me most when I was working on that Yom Kippur Drush was the longer, right? The study then, I don't want to misquote the numbers, that Jewish women in particular waited for longer time, I think it was 3 years longer when studied, to acknowledge that they were being hurt and to look for help. And I think our reticence to talk about this, how stigmatized certain topics are in our community, because we think we're supposed to be immune from it or better than that, or, and the way that I ended up telling the drash, I think in the one that ended up in the book, was different than the first time I offered it. I offered this talk, I gave this talk originally because someone in the shul came forward and asked me for help, told me that she was being hurt at home. And again, it was toward the beginning of my career, and it's not that I'm capable now of knowing what to do. There are, thank God, resources in our community that deserve more support than they receive, because the number of people, mostly women, but not only women, who are hurt at home and children who are really vulnerable to verbal violence, or God forbid, physical violence and sexual violence, things that happen in Jewish homes, they don't have all the opportunities to be acknowledged. And this is a lack of awareness on our communal level. We have a responsibility to raise those voices and to hear the unheard, because they've done nothing wrong and deserve our support. So I gave this talk, and as I'm walking from room to room, I don't know how it is at Sinai, but at my shul in Sharon, Massachusetts, Temple Israel, a very special, sweet community, the rabbis rotated. We gave the drash, and then we'd go to another room and give. So between room 1 and 2, two sweet people, right, older women in the community said, "Rabbi, you shouldn't talk about ugly things like that. They don't happen here."
Oh, gosh.
And it happened to be, and I will never not be seeing this. They were sitting 2 rows in front of the person who had shared with me her story.
Oh, gosh.
And I think of my own children and the world that they deserve, and the love and safety they deserve, and to be close with people who have suffered. And then I think Naomi Gratz wrote this book, The Suffering Born in Silence, right? Enough of silence. Mental illness is not at all the same, but in a paradigm where we don't acknowledge that we have work to do in our community to care for each other appropriately, begins with acknowledging that we're human beings. And Jewish community is special, but not unique in that way. We have bodies, and sometimes those bodies are not treated with the reverence that bodies deserve to be treated with.
That's right. Just along those lines, I mean, I feel so blessed that Sinai Temple recognizes the importance of mental health, and are really putting support behind this. We were speaking a few months ago in conversations about the mental health center, how often we offer a Misha Berach Lecholim. You know, we'll talk about who's ill in our community, and we'll like many synagogues across the country on Shabbat, you know, we'll offer this during the Torah service, and we'll have a list of names, and those, you know, sadly are ill with different physical ailments. But how rare it is for someone to come forward and say, "I'm depressed. Will you put my name on that list? You know, will you say my name?" Or, you know, suicidal ideation. Is that something you're willing to pray for me out loud? I just want to be seen. So that's one of the shifts we're really hoping to make in our own community, and I'm hoping as a model for the country. But the fact that you decided to speak about domestic violence and what it means to create a safe home and safe community on Yom Kippur speaks volumes of the rabbi that you are. You're welcome. So let's go back to Runaway Bunny. Okay. Because it's so much about, you know, for those who remember, and if you don't, go buy that book too. That no matter how much the mommy bunny tries, or how much the baby bunny tries to run away, the mommy bunny says, "I'll find you." Which, by the way, is also a little scary, because you can also.
I've thought about that angle too. I remember writing this and someone saying to me,
"Say it out loud."
Yeah,
you know?
I'd like a little space, God. A little bit of space.
And that's what I was thinking. Oh, wait, that's a little enmeshed for me. Okay, maybe we actually need a little bit of separation, but okay. But yes, similar to our own hiding from God, perhaps for many, they may say God's hiding from us. I argue, God, you know, the opposite, God's persistence in staying present in our own lives, and sometimes our inability to open our eyes wide enough or open our hearts wide enough to see God's presence. I'm wondering if you could speak about your current theology. I feel like this is something you and I used to talk about years and years ago. But if you're willing to share your relationship to God, and if you will, to channel our dear Rabbi Gilman of blessed memory, your metaphor.
I was about to invoke.
Are you going to say that? Okay.
Beautiful teacher. I miss Neil so much.
I miss him so much. Too.
For those who don't know, Rabbi Neil Gilman, Dr. Neil Gilman, was among the most generous of souls with wonderful scholarship, but a bigger heart than his library. And
now I'm going to cry. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I miss him. So in his honor, we'll ask and think together. There was a time, because of my work with him, actually, he got me to think again about a lot of the assumptions about God that I had made, or rather the things I had accepted without really thinking about. You know, Hashem is here, Hashem is there, Hashem is truly everywhere. Right? So that's a really interesting theology, isn't it? That's the runaway bunny. But it's also kind of spooky. I remember Shalom Auslander's book, Foreskin's Lament, deals with that book and says, oh my God, that's so scary. God's always watching.
Always watching.
You want to read a very scary book of personal reflections to that kind of theology. Shalom Auslander's book is a really complicated one, but interesting to read. There was a time, based on my work with Rabbi Gilman, that I came to a certain belief, right? The way that I articulated my theology was God is the collective potential of the human imagination. Which for me at that time meant that God is not me and not what I can imagine. And God is not the two of us and what we can imagine. God is not even what every human being alive today can imagine. It's every human being who ever was and ever will be. Wow. What we dream about, that's God. And one of the reasons that I got to that place was because as a senior rabbinical student in September of 2001, people who were sure about what God wanted flew planes into buildings and massacred thousands of people. And I was in Manhattan. Were you there? You were there.
No, I was in Los Angeles, actually.
You were in Los Angeles.
I was at UCLA, yeah. Yeah,
I didn't know where you were yet. And I was expecting my first child. And my childhood notion of God ended that day. And that's led me in lots of different activist directions, but in terms of the inner journey in my relationship with God, I believed the way I did for a long time the collective potential of the human imagination, because I did not want to believe in a God who does intervene or could intervene, because if I believed in a God who could intervene and did intervene, how could God not intervene?
No.
You know, when Rabbi Harold Kushner said, someone asked him, where was God on 9/11? He said, God was holding up the beams of the buildings so the more people could get out. That was meant to be comforting. But the corollary question is, what about those who didn't? What about those who were on the planes? You know, God saved my child. What about this one that didn't get saved? What kind of a God is that? And I remember that day, in the weekday prayers, we have a paragraph, V'lam al sheim al tihi tikva. Bad people shouldn't have any success. I'll just say it like that. Someone asked me to lead mincha that day at JTS, and I screamed that blessing. I've never screamed in prayer before. My life has abundant blessing that I can't count. And my theology has changed over time. You know, they say theology is always autobiography. I don't know if it's always true, but my metaphor today, my kids are, by the way, doing this project right now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, my daughter and my stepson are both in 8th grade, and they're working with a wonderful teacher who's asking them in their Tanakh class, a book about the Hebrew Bible, class about the Hebrew Bible, to explore what is their metaphor for God. if I could find a way for that older language, God is the collective potential of the human imagination, to also have a heart that cares directly for people.
Mm.
There have been moments in my life that I cannot explain within the last, short number of years. I would count the moment of falling in love with my wife
Mm.
as a moment that defies logic. And she was in New York and I was in California, and we each have children. And only if miracles were going to happen, first of all, were these two friends who'd known each other for decades going to fall in love over the phone and never even use video talking to each other, which we could have. The improbability of the blessing that has now exploded in my life, I do attribute to a loving God, and I refuse to not see that as godly and as blessing. And I don't know that I have my metaphor in place yet, but I believe more in the stirrings of God in history than I ever have.
Mm. And I think just that line that you just said, that you refuse not to see. There's a sense of, if that's, if you will, a definition of faith, I would hold on to that. I know we have to close soon, but I'd love for you to speak just for a few more moments about a spiritual way forward. I mean, we're at a really interesting transition right now. I mean, I know you and I really do love, if it wasn't for this embrace of technology over the last, 15 months or so, I don't know if you and I would have thought, oh, let's have a Facebook conversation or a Zoom conversation over Facebook. But that being said, we are transitioning towards being back in person with our communities, embracing a new step forward. And you wrote that potholes are rarely celebrated. And I love that you use that line, because it reminds us that the potholes exist and yet there's a way to celebrate. And so I'm wondering if you can move us. I really dug through the book. I love it. If you can kind of close for us towards moments of hope. What do you hope for, and how are you hopeful?
Oh, my rabbi.
No.
Don't go. I wanted. I'm so
it's
happy
so
to
fun.
be.
It's so fun.
So good. I want more of this. That was the first piece of mine that was ever published.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Wow.
you picked really well. You just didn't know.
I didn't know.
I remember writing about this, that potholes on the way to my eldest child's birth were a source of enormous pain. There was no avoiding them. We were in Manhattan, it was intense. And but potholes tell you where there have been people.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
And pavement is a temporary thing. The world is not smooth. And so in all of these moments of history where something happens, and in history, something's always happening, there is rupture, especially on well-worn roads. So I think that these 15 months, if we do our jobs right, and I mean you and me, like faith leaders, first of all, we're going to hold our elected leaders accountable for the world that we are asking them to steward. We're going to remind our people that kindness is an absolute priority in our leaders. And empathy is something that that the lack of empathy should disqualify someone from ever wielding power. I think churches and mosques and synagogues and neighborhoods matter because we are more aware explicitly of our obligations to our neighbors. And any brand of political discourse, by which I simply mean people talking to each other,
Sure.
Has to be aware of what it was to not have each other.
Mm-hmm.
And those 7 o'clock recognize your local heroes. The real question is, what are we going to do for our nurses and our teachers who, I'm not comparing the two professions, but those are two uncelebrated, heroic ways of being in the world. Are we going to remember to show gratitude for those people who save our lives? Are you going to recognize that the person who collected the garbage kept your city going? Are you going to thank them for their work?
Every single day, right?
Right. So what has given me hope, or what do I see as hopeful? Recognizing the essential work of being human. I think that is so hopeful. I don't want grand statements or, do I expect world peace tomorrow? No. But in the moments where humanity peeks through, that is the most hopeful we should ever want to be. So I you give me hope. My neighbor gives me hope. My child gives me hope. Someone I don't know who does something nice for someone else, as simple as kindness.
And if I can just add, your own writing speaks to this moment. So that's towards, I believe, the end of your book where you speak about potholes, I think. But at the beginning, you write a piece about what does it mean. And what I loved in that piece is that you spoke about the lack of purpose existing in the security of the womb. That, we all look back to the womb experience, and that becoming human is actually not a very clean, peaceful process. But to be human, it's painful and it's messy, but it's beautiful. To be a human is beautiful. And so just like the rupture of birth, if you will, and just like the potholes that we experience in our lifetime, both have the potential, the beautiful, godly potential of offering and seeing beauty in this world. So that's what I took from the bookends of your book. And again, I leave everyone today saying, if you're looking for a lifelong read, but also just something you can enjoy over a Shabbat or before High Holy Days, please look up A Rabbi's Heart, Rabbi Menachem Creditor, one of my beloved rabbis. Thank you so much for giving me the chance to bring this into my own heart.
What a delight to spend some time with you, my friend. Thank you for this. And everybody, if you want a wisdom teacher in the world to really pay attention to, Rabbi Nicole Guzik, please follow her. You'll be glad.
Thank you. Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.